All right, Justin E. Lane, welcome to what's supposed to be the 100th episode. I know I told you that, but my guest canceled on the day of, so we're on the 99th episode of NEOHUMAN
Oh,
podcast.
hey,
Still a pretty good number.
that's a very good number. That's a very good number.
Yeah, thank you for your time and thank you for being here, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I saw you on War Room,
Yeah,
and I thought your research is about something very, very interesting. Is about, from my perspective, about the tool and the intention behind the tool, which is AI and religion. So
yeah,
I'm hoping that we get to that. But before getting into any of that, and talking about your book, you also have a new book.
yeah.
Congratulations about that. Understanding Religion Through Artificial Intelligence, Bonding and Belief. We'll be talking about that too. But just so we can have some kind of a context, let's start with your background, the works you've done, the lives you've lived, and what are you mainly focused on now these days?
Yeah, so I've lived many lives in my short time on this earth. I've been very blessed in that regard. I'm originally from the DC area. Kind of grew up in a really small town on the eastern shore of Maryland, where it's just chicken coops and cornfields mostly. Um, and That's it kind of ties back in later, which is why I mentioned this. I did my undergraduate studies in religion actually at the University of Vermont, where I got really interested actually in this idea that every culture and every group of people throughout all of human history has had religion. And I grew up in the Methodist Church. And I had a really positive experience in the church as a kid for the most part. And then, of course, I was in high school around 9/11. And on the one hand, I have my personal experience, which is positive with religion. It was really a bedrock for my family growing up. And then, of course, I also see that religion can breed terrorism. And so it kind of just led to a lot of questions in my mind. And I kind of set off to try and answer the question of, why do people do things that are so irrational, as, kill themselves in the name of their God? But then also, how can this one thing, right? How can these deeply held beliefs and how can our faith inspire both beauty and horror? And it kind of set me off in that curiosity. That curiosity set me off in my direction. I realized around the time that I was finishing my degree, actually, that being able to program computers, it was a skill that I had that was fairly unique amongst people who study religion. Most people who study religion, they read texts. My languages in college were Latin and ancient Greek, not, Python or Java, which is what I use to study religion now. So it really kind of set me down that path. And I realized I had to go to Europe to kind of study this further. American universities are not into a scientific approach to religion. They really want to push this sort of like hard postmodernist ideology. They want to look at cultural relativism and everything has to be described. And, science is just kind of like lensing this imperial patriarchy over top of, other people. And that wasn't going anywhere for me. I needed to be able to use the scientific approach. And so I went to Belfast, actually, in Northern Ireland. Of course, Belfast is well known for the troubles that they've had between the Protestants and the Catholics for years, for decades at this point. And so living there kind of also framed it. And I said, okay, well, I've studied conflict, I've studied AI, and now I also want to try and study stability. And so I did my doctoral research at Oxford University, where for part of that actually, and I did my doctoral research in an anthropology department, believe it or not, where I used data science and AI to try and answer critical questions about why large-scale religions persist the way they do today. And I went to Singapore actually to validate this, because Singapore is the most religiously diverse nation on earth, and it is insanely stable given its levels of diversity on every metric. So it's kind of an anomaly. So I wanted to study that and see, what can I learn? How can I compare it to Belfast? How can I compare it to what I see in America? And what does that kind of mean? And that kind of set me off on my journey and what brought me to Europe, and went back, did some teaching and some work at Boston University for a few years. As a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Mind and Culture, and then came back to Europe and started working really doing consultancy, and then started a private company that does work in simulation and data analytics to try and help people, navigate social media without having to rely on censorship. And without having to rely on the sensationalist algorithms of like Twitter and Facebook to kind of promote material in a negative way. So trying to, make social media fun again.
That's a noble objective.
Thanks. I might be doomed to fail, but I'm doomed to try.
Well, I mean, it really is about, you mentioned you were wondering about how religion give birth to the worst and the best of humanity. But it really seems to be the natural, undeniable natural reality of who we are, that we are capable of doing the worst and we're capable of doing the best. And
We really are.
some would even say that one wouldn't exist without the other. So we have to take them all together. So this is an interesting point with respect to religions and then AI, because AI is being used as an underlaying of some kind of a system that, as you put it, brings some kind of a stability with respect, or we're having in mind to have a certain degree of respect for diversity of thoughts and ideas and perspectives, and all those kind of philosophies and worldviews.
Yeah, I think, and I also think, it's interesting to think of things as, the positive with the negative. In some cases, religion is a tool that people leverage for their own means, right? A lot of people pick and choose different things in a religious text just to justify what they're going to do. And what they really want to do is political, actually. And they just want religion to justify it. It's a flag that they fly more than anything else. And in that regards, any tool, when it's used for good, can do great things, and when it's used for evil, can do horrible things, right? So, AI also is like that. Artificial intelligence, of course, can automate all sorts of interesting things. It protects us from fraud on our credit cards. But it also is exacerbating social instability globally, I think, because of the way that it selectively promotes sensationalism on social media, and the way that it's constantly pinging us, in our brains, basically, quite literally, I guess, in our pockets, to constantly pay attention and go for social validation for something that's not real. And insofar as social media is real, it's not what's really important. Religion has had a tough time. Religions generally have had a tough time making the jump to the social media space, right? Even the Pope has a lot of followers on Twitter, but you don't hear about the Pope going viral on Twitter, right? And I think part of it is because religion is fundamentally something that is really deep rooted in face-to-face interactions, and social media just doesn't, it doesn't capture that energy in the same way. And so social media might be an interesting place for religious groups to post reminders, or, reaffirmations, but you don't see a lot of online religions growing very fast, at least not the way you'd expect.
Do you think it's because that the values within that social context that you mentioned is defined by very few people, relatively speaking, who are also practicing their own kind of a religion? It is not conventional kind of a religion, but it's a worldview and a philosophy that determines this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, right? Because that seems to be the main job of the religion, which, by the way, going back to 9/11, I grew up as a Muslim in Iran. I went to school as a Shia Muslim. Mm-hmm. So my biggest shock when I moved to the West, first in Canada and then US, was how people were treating Islam, because it was very clear to us that Islam is inherently a political religion. It is used for political reason because it exists for political reason. So, all those
it was
extreme
born
things,
out of political struggle, right?
Absolutely. It's
the book describes it quite clearly.
It's a book of rules and laws that, includes every single aspect of your life, including how to govern and, how to do all of that. And it's a very big question how the true followers of that religion would ever be able to assimilate to Western society, because they don't care about the laws that are man-made. They care about the laws of Allah.
Right. And this is interesting too, because the separation of religion as a thing, right, is actually a very new idea, and it's a very Western idea,
Yeah.
because it's rooted very much in the idea of a separation of church and state, which is, not quite even 300 years old yet. So in the grand scheme of human civilization, this is like the newest idea that we've had, right, is to make religion a separate thing. A lot of cultures throughout the world don't even have a word for religion. It's just that's what they do and what they believe. It doesn't need a word. And I think when you look at, almost any non-Western tradition, but Islam definitely being one of them, the separation of like the secular and the sacred just doesn't even make sense.
No.
It's a non-starter. That really only exists in the West. And I think it's one of the reasons why the West has had trouble understanding Islam, is because, from our perspective, right, from, the North American perspective, let's say, or even the European perspective now, there's very much this idea of like, well, that's just a religious thing. But they don't understand that it's not just a religious thing. It's religion, it's culture, it's kind of everything.
It's a life
about
thing.
the context. It's a life thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't really understand that. Yeah. But it's on the other side of that, kind of getting back to the comment you made earlier. One of the things that's interesting about that is that a lot of times there are people doing things religiously, and they don't see how religious they're being in a secular space. And social media is exactly this. So myself and two of my friends and researchers that I work with, Laurent Schultz and Kevin McCaffrey, we studied online behavior on Twitter using some of the AI systems that I've developed for analyzing texts on social media to try and better understand what people's concerns are. And what we started to find out is that the moral signature of the far left of Twitter actually mimics the moral signature that experimentally is usually more common to conservatives, particularly conservative religious churches. And it kind of led us to kind of think, well, maybe this isn't just an anomaly here. Like theoretically, right, you have a group of people on the very far left of Twitter who have certain beliefs that cannot be violated. And if you do violate them, you should basically be, excommunicated,
erased
from the community. Yeah, you should be erased. You should be canceled. Yep. But then if somebody tries to critique your sort of leadership, right, your priesthood, then that can't be tolerated. And generally, you'll just deny that it's happening. In order to resolve the cognitive dissonance. And if something bad happens within your group, you're going to try and push harder to try and say, well, even though what's happening is not right ideologically, if I can get more people to join my group, then it justifies my beliefs and it still makes me look like I'm right. This is the original research for cognitive dissonance, which happened in a UFO cult, right? And that exact idea of like, our leadership is failing us, but if we get more people to join our side, then it justifies my belief and my identity of being part of this political party. You see that every 4 years in the United States now. It's almost wild to see, if it weren't so scary, to see the way that the political parties in the U.S. now basically operate as sort of secular religions.
That is very true. And they don't see it as a religion at all, because they're using religion as, it's so funny. I was telling somebody that religion by far leftists are being used the same way that, for example, Israel and America were being used for Iranian regime to have this, ultimate enemy because of which everything else that you do is justified. So it just feels like the moment that they manage to remove that "in God we trust" from back of the money, it will be replaced immediately by "in state we trust." And the value and the religion of state is determined on the basis of very fundamentalist and uber conservative kind of religious values that are secular.
Yeah. It's interesting to reflect on that too, right? Because even when you look at the political parties, as religions, it's not just a matter of belief too. Like we have our own rituals, our own secular rituals, right? Like anyone who looks at the inauguration of a president can obviously see the ritual that goes there. You know, when you look at the way that the Senate is like the way that the like the halls are actually set up, they're set up like churches. Like all of the people sit in the pew, the one guy goes to the top pulpit and speaks. You know, they have like the sort of like, you know, all of the pomp and circumstance behind them of whatever altar or whatever sort of structure there is. And it's, you know, it was deliberately done that way. I mean, when you go into I think it's the Capitol Rotunda, and you look straight up, it has George Washington being sworn in, right? And that was done in a very ritualistic way because they felt it had to be done like a ritual, but they weren't sure how to do it, right? So he wore his Freemason's outfit because there's an entire ritual structure to Freemasonry. And he went, well, I don't have any better idea. So everyone that was there was kind of, you know, they were in Freemasonry as well. So they just kind of did this Masonic-like ritual to be part of the inauguration. The Bible that they swore him in on, if I'm not mistaken, was actually a Bible from the local Freemasonry lodge as well. And so it kind of reflected this idea that they needed ritual there. And if I'm not mistaken, the title of that work of art in the Capitol Rotunda is called The Apotheosis of Washington, right? Which is, you know, the man becoming God is basically how you could translate that in Greek, right? And Washington does exist kind of as a quasi deity in a way. And what's I find interesting and very frightening is that in the US now, you know, our founding fathers were always well respected, you know, if not kind of quasi deified, in at least in a secular sense, not in a sort of faith or real religion sense. But now we no longer agree in the United States that the founding fathers are to be venerated or are to be even respected. And in some cases, you know, we're actively taking down statues of the founding fathers, and people are arguing that even like people as important as Abraham Lincoln should be kind of re-edited into a modern lens. And that is something that's very troubling, because when you look at how schisms start in religions, that's one of the main causes is people disagree on, you know, the role of a founder. And that is what can make or break, you know, just about any religion. I mean, you can even see that in how Protestantism split from Catholicism. You can see it also in the Sunni Shia split historically as well, had to do with, you know, leadership and who had sort of the right lineage at the right times. You see the same thing in Buddhism as well. Almost every major religion can, if there's been a split or if there are multiple branches, you can trace those multiple branches to an argument over the lineage and over the founders.
Yeah, I was going to say that bringing down the statues of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, I see literally no difference between that and Taliban exploding the Buddha statues in Bamiyan, because it's about the status quo, it's about the ethos. And so it makes total sense that the American religion, or American Dharma, as Steve Bannon put it, is being challenged by the woke Dharma and the woke religion.
Yeah, and in a way, right? I mean, sadly, I wish it were more complex, and to an extent, I guess it's more complex than what I'm about to say, obviously. But heuristically speaking, it does make sense to kind of say that, you know, there's the American identity, and then there's the woke identity. And currently the woke identity is anti-American. Yep. It doesn't stand for American values. It is, you know, when you look at Antifa protests and Antifa riots, you know, they're burning American symbols, they're spitting, they're burning the American flag. And they're doing that, and they know exactly what they're doing when they do it, right? They are, you know, they're arguing that what was it, New York City, I think it was, just took Thomas Jefferson out of the city hall.
Yes.
Like these events are symbolic, but they're very real when it comes to constructing an identity. And I think one of the ways that you see this is it starts as a slippery slope, and then it happens quickly. Historically speaking, when you look at, you know, moves like this and shifts like this, it starts slow, and then it starts and then it ends fast. Um, but also you see this, as part of the slow start, I think, was getting rid of the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. I think that that's one of those things. I had a very good friend growing up who was Jehovah's Witness, and he claimed a religious exemption, and he wouldn't stand for the pledge. And I don't have any problem with that. If that's a religious exemption, that's fine. But as a society, the bulk of us, the most of us, should have something that we do that repeats and reaffirms our identity as a people. And every people should have that, right? Because it helps them to create their identity. And people who have stronger identities are generally happier, right? If you get into a situation and times are tough, that you have people in your group that can help you out. You have common experiences, common beliefs, and the reaffirmation of something like this, the Pledge of Allegiance, very much functioned to do that psychologically for a very long time. Even though we did change the Pledge of Allegiance at a certain point, right, and added "In God We Trust" on our currency at a certain point to reflect that our identity was different than the rise in the communist identity during the Cold War. So it had a particular function, historically speaking. But at the same time, we can change those words. What's important is that those words reflect core values, though, and that they're repeated often enough that we all know where we all stand.
Yeah, a common big picture to strive towards, to give meaning to this experience that you're having. Otherwise, what's the difference of being anywhere?
Exactly. Exactly. And you see this in some of the thought leadership on the woke side of the United States right now, where in the past, free markets, freedom of expression, free speech, these were certain rights that were just fundamental to the American belief. We can disagree on different things. We don't have to be the same religion or like the same kind of drinks, or even drink beer or not drink beer, or whatever it is. Those are just details. Even vote Republican or Democrat or third party, those were kind of details, because we all agreed things like free speech, freedom of association, a free press, help, and then little things too, like helping your neighbor, right? Being someone that you can rely on, respecting your elders, giving up your seat on the bus when somebody needs it. Like, there were these little cultural things that kind of built up, who Americans were as an identity and as a people, and those things, a lot of them have come under attack. Quite directly. Some of the woke leadership, I was watching an interview on Democracy Now! Not that long ago, with Ibram X. Kendi, who was at Boston University at the same time I was, actually, or he still is there. And he mentioned that to be anti-racist, right, which was his neologism, to try and kind of create a mental gymnastics leap
for racism
in his books. Yeah, for racism, right? It's basically to be anti-racist is to be racist, but a different kind.
Yes.
And it's a kind that he thinks is a good kind of racism, which boggles my mind, right? When I was at Boston University, my office was in the School of Religion and Theology, which is the school that granted Dr. Martin Luther King his doctorate. And at that same university now, there is a man who is perpetuating racism under the guise of equity and inclusion, and just kind of spitting on the greatest speeches and teachings that Martin Luther King ever gave the United States. And that just blew my mind. It made me very uncomfortable to be there at the university. And it made a lot of the students uncomfortable as well. I got very close with some of the students who, were not okay with the woke direction the university was going with. One of them is Joe Allen, who's now a correspondent for Steve Bannon on the War Room. Joe's still a good friend of mine to this day, actually. We disagree about a lot of stuff, but we respect each other. We know that at the end of the day, we have those core values, right? So when he and I go back and forth on AI and transhumanism, we really get arguing, but we do it out of a place of respect. Yeah. And at the end of it, we both know that, we're still gonna, have a cheers of our beer at the end of the conversation, and everything's going to be fine, because we know that those fundamental core values are there, and those are the guiding lights. The debates are just how we kind of take turns to right the ship as we move forward, but I think we can't have progress without those fundamental values being there. Ibram X. Kendi on Democracy Now! Recently said that to be anti-racist is to be anti-capitalist. And the repercussions of that, particularly in light of the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement saying that they have an ideology, and they are trained Marxists, and the relationship between wokeism and social justice warrior terms and neo-Marxist terms being very clear. And we've spelled this out actually in research that we've published online as well, showing not only using an analysis of Google Books, which is the largest corpus that's digitized in the history of humankind. We also were following Twitter conversations online. And we were finding that you do still see this relationship between this sort of like neo-Marxist ideology and the social justice warriorship taking off slowly from the 80s and then really propelling exponentially into the 2000s. And these things are all related. And I think that's what's really defining the rhetoric of the left. And it worries me because that's the dominant rhetoric on social media. And ideally, social media is a place for all of us to speak and for all of us to kind of have our discussions, even if we disagree. But what we're seeing now is a partitioning of social media. Or what we've seen recently is a partitioning of social media, of the Twitter and the Facebooks, and then your alternatives, right? Like Minds, Getter, Parler, and the other. And I support those alternative social media sites. I have accounts on most of them, and I use them at different levels. I use them all more than I use Facebook and more than I use Twitter. But I think that, we need to have a common dialogue. And, Reddit has a lot of different people there. It has a lot of diversity of thought. But it also has a censorship issue, in my opinion. They're too quick to censor.
So we're at the point that our digital and our analog, online and offline lives are suffering, if we want to use that term, from the same kind of gridlocks, that they all go back to monopolization of values and ideas. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that the monopolization of values and ideas is really unhealthy socially. And social media the foundation of it offline has existed for a little while, but it was kind of, it was a little bit here and there in the media. But now recently it has been just, it hits us over the head every day. One of the things that we found in our research, and I gave a talk about this recently, the talk's actually on YouTube, in Cyprus at the Reflect Festival in October. I presented some interesting research that shows that when you look at crime rates in America and perceived crime rates in America, so the actual crime rates and then how people think the crime rate's going, they basically they have data going back to the 80s and the 90s, and so basically kind of keeps going down and down and down. And it's true, both the crime rate was going down, it's been going down for decades when you look at the general trend, but it goes down, and then all of a sudden there's a divergence where the crime rate keeps going down, but the perceived crime rate starts to go up. And when you look at when this divergence happens, the divergence keeps getting greater and greater and greater between actual crime rates and perceived crime rates as adoption of broadband internet in the United States starts to go up and the rise of social media usage starts to go up in the United States. That's one of the things where it's just a very clear tell of, that constant media stream with algorithms that are perpetuating and promoting the most sensational news, right? Which is typically violence or instability or riots or robberies. These are the things that are going to get promoted by these algorithms because those are the things that are going to get the most engagement and it's going to get the most people talking. And we've suffered in the real world psychologically because of it. And I think that was a very large part in setting up the context and the motivation for the riots that we saw in 2000, where a lot of people were frustrated, some justifiably so, and some were just there because they perceived the world in a way that wasn't true.
You mean 2020?
Yeah, 2020. Yeah, in 2020, and to an extent, I guess 2021, but it's really kind of died down recently. But in 2020, there was a lot of anger, and it was very much being promoted by social media and the actual media. I mean, generally I try and follow both sides of the media to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And then I have a few sources that I really like because I think they start from a place of balance. And then I have a couple that I like just because they're keeping people in line. And Project Veritas, for example, is one of them. I follow Project Veritas, and sometimes I don't like the way they frame things here and there, but on the whole, I think that he is doing really good work.
Yeah.
In exposing a lot of nonsense. And one of the things that was exposed by Project Veritas was one of the CNN producers, and he literally said, if it bleeds, it leads. And they had the coronavirus infection and body count going all the way through the election. And then after the election, it just went away. The virus didn't go away, but all of a sudden the media coverage went away. And now they're caught in between this, want to basically propagandize for the Biden administration at CNN and make it look like everything's going well and he's solving the coronavirus problem, but also kind of push their narrative that the coronavirus problem is getting out of hand and that they need more lockdowns. And so they're really kind of caught in an almost Orwellian doublespeak. It's almost like watching 1984 unfold like it was written as a handbook instead of a fiction.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those approaches, like, how can you be that stupid to say fiery but mostly peaceful?
Right?
It's like, you cannot possibly be that stupid. So there is a reason, there is an intention behind, kind of nudging things to the direction that they want to be led towards their bigger narrative, which goes back to monopolization of values and ideals that are being practiced in a very religious kind of a way. Now, I want to say that all of this has hyped up, perhaps because of use of computers and use of internet, and more recently, use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, use of modern technology, basically, which is evolving exponentially while we're experiencing in a very linear kind of a fashion. So that's why maybe it seems like everything is getting out of control. But the problem is that these AI systems that are now being built and monopolized by a lot of these people, they are following the same kind of monopolization of values and ideals and objectives and goals, because the same people who have caused these problems, right now in this world, they're behind developing these systems that they can later on use for like a social credit system and, on and on and on.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea of implementation of a social credit system is in my mind, is one of the scariest things in the AI debate right now. A lot of AI, honestly, is useless and unimpressive. And when you look at really what's being developed out there, a lot of it's not that interesting. A lot of it's nonsense. A lot of it's like, make your face look like a turtle. It's just stupid stuff. But there's certain ideas that are being implemented in for example, in China, the social credit system. It should be the biggest wake up call to the West generally that has existed since the 1930s. And I don't see any other way around it. And I mean, I almost, I don't want to come off as hyperbolic, but when you look at what's going on there in China, when it comes to the social credit score, when it comes to the concentration camps that they have in Xinjiang, when it comes to the way they're manipulating the media, the way they treated the COVID lockdowns by just welding the doors shut and just helping people fend for themselves, and then acting like it didn't happen, and then not even to necessarily go down the rabbit hole that is the lab leak, but it's just, you look at that and you look at China today and the way that it's utilizing like child labor in Africa to monopolize things like critical rare earth materials and stuff. It's just, there's nothing going on there that suggests that this is a peaceful interaction that we're going to continue to have. Everything suggests that this is a Cold War scenario led by a World War II level dictatorship.
Perhaps more dangerous, because Nazis could even dream of, having this level of technology, this level of tool.
Yeah. I mean, Nazis didn't have the bomb, right? And China does. They didn't have AI. when they had to go around and check on people's papers, and they were just looking at people to kind of see, oh, do you have your papers, are you the right, do you go to a synagogue, what religion do you have, what's your last name, how do you spell it, do you speak Yiddish. They were looking at these things. And they were looking for that. They were looking for all sorts of people, right? They were looking for the Roma, for the Gypsies as well. And, the Gypsies typically have a darker skin tone in this part of Europe. So a lot of times they were easy to spot and round up. But in looking at what China's doing, I mean, they are using AI, and there are patents that have come forward that say we can identify Uyghur Muslims. And then they act like, oh, no, well, we didn't really say that. And it's like, we saw you said that. Like, this is obviously happening. And these systems are being put into place where you can just round people up using AI for saying the wrong thing, for looking the wrong way, for having the wrong belief. And I mean, ultimately, they're doing to the Uyghurs what they wished they could have done to the Tibetans before that. And it's only a matter of time before they find someone outside of their border that's standing in the way of the regime's dominance of the CCP, and they're going to target them too.
Yeah,
that's the scariest thing, I think.
They already installed automated robots at the border with India that they're automatically shooting at Indian soldiers. So they're using
I've read reports of this.
They're using all the tools at their disposal for, the objective that they have, this bigger picture that they have, point of alignment that is defined by the Communist Party. And I think this is a point of difference between me and someone like Joe Allen, who I had about 2-hour long conversation with him on the phone, mostly about AI.
He told me he had a long conversation with you on AI.
And I enjoyed it. I actually approached him and said, dude, you're doing a very good job, because these kind of stuff, I've talked with a lot of people during this podcast that politicians aren't even talking about it. And these are the most consequential things that are happening. And the most valid answer I got is that politicians aren't talking about it because this is not a worry of their constituents. Constituents don't even know these things exist and these things are happening, which, brings an entire issue with how are we dealing with democracy as a system of governance when you have a centrally driven monster and dragon like China on the other side of the equation. But my point is that we cannot get rid of tools to defeat tools. We need to use the tools based on our intention and our own values and perspective in order to defeat enemy, whoever you want to call it, that are using very freely and openly whatever kind of tool that is available to them. And I think this is a point that I take part with a lot of people on the right who are saying, no, all this technology, the modern technology, AI and all that, they're demonic, they're evil, they're satanic, we shouldn't be using them at all. I'm like, well, you're not going to survive them.
Yeah. It's funny because actually I feel like, not to talk about Joe when he's not here, but I feel like Joe kind of struggles with that too. Because when he and I talk about that, he has this kind of tonality to it, as if it's like, this is like a struggle against sort of like, this almost like demonic technology. And I don't view it that way at all, actually. I mean, I'm very pro technology.
Yeah, same.
I do think it's a tool, and I think it's a tool that we can use, right? And so we've been working, so my company has been working with minds.com. We started a project about, I guess it's about a year ago now, where they read a paper that we did on simulating censorship. And basically our conclusion, based on running 20,000 different simulations of how individuals interact on social networks, that centralized censorship actually increases radicalization. And that allowing people to just choose with whom they interact and saying, that guy, he's being a dick, I'm gonna block him. And so you just block him instead of having Facebook come in and remove him entirely. That centralized censorship increases radicalization, but the one-to-one censorship doesn't have the same sort of effect. So I was speaking with the guys at minds.com, and they're committed to not censoring, right? Unless it's illegal, they won't censor it. If it's, not safe for work, they ask you to tag it so you can blur it so that, if you're using minds.com at work, you don't have something pornographic scroll up your feed, for example. Like, they don't block pornography, right? It's legal. It can stay on the site. Just respect others who might be checking this, at work, and blur it out for them, is what they ask. And so I really like that approach. I really support that approach. I think it aligns with free speech values. So the question then is, how can we also make sure, though, that radicalization and hatred don't breed on that site? And on the one hand, not censoring already helps. But on the other hand, what causes radicalization is not using the internet, right? There's been tons of studies on this, and none of them have really shown that internet use is a strong predictor of radicalization or extremism. What is a predictor are real life experiences. And what seems to be happening, particularly with people who are like, for example, if they're white supremacists and they are to the point of extremism where they may commit violence against another racial community. What typically has happened is that their understanding of that racial community just is not realistic at all. And it's usually because of isolation, right? They've never actually spoken to someone of another race or had to interact with them. And so it allows them to breed hatred. And I think that's why guys like Daryl Davis have been so effective in de-radicalization. And Daryl Davis is part of the project with us, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, he's been great to work with. So we were working with Daryl Davis, and the late Jesse Morton was also part of this with us. And we have, Bill Ottman, the CEO at Minds, is working with us directly on it, as is Jack, the COO at Minds. So it's been a really fun, really cool project where we've brought in all kinds of experts globally on radicalization and said, look, what are your proposals? And we hear them out, and we just tell them, like, censorship is non-negotiable. That's not on the table for us. Like, we're going to figure out how to address radicalization and extremism, but we're not going to sacrifice these core values. And that's been a really interesting project, because everyone's response in social media is just ban them, just get rid of them. And the issue is that doesn't solve the problem. That just makes it so that you don't see the problem. And that's a very different solution.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind, they think, but it'll always come back harder and more extreme. Like, you can't get rid of information.
Yeah, like, one of the things that boggled my mind was the general media response to, like, what was going on in 2020, and even all the way up to, like, the January 6th protests and everything. Is like, people were so surprised. And I was like, why are you surprised by this? You're just not listening. If you're surprised, you're just not listening. And I think part of it, and one of the reasons why I think the January 6th protest was so surprising to people, is because those were the kinds of voices that have been algorithmically silenced. And so people didn't realize how widespread, not QAnon, not any particular conspiracy theory, but how widespread frustration with the government system leading into the election, and then frustration with the election, and the idea that they did not have a voice heard in the justice system, that was suppressed online. So nobody saw it coming when, it instantiated itself the way that it did on January 6th. And that I find very interesting. And then the media, of course, has now used this as like impetus for domestic terrorist reform, the likes of which we've not seen since 9/11. And that I find very confusing from a legal perspective, from a policy perspective. Because while I agree, if a group tries to take over the Senate during a proceeding, that is just by letter of the law, right? And you look at how the FBI defines what terrorism is basically any sort of use or threat of violence in order to achieve a political end, right? It's a very vague definition, maybe problematically vague, actually. But if we take that definition, I can see how you could apply that definition to a small subset of the people present on January 6th. However, if you apply it to January 6th, but you don't apply it to Antifa in 2020, it makes me question the extent to which this is entirely politically motivated.
It is entirely politically motivated.
About security. Yeah. And that's the conclusion that I've come to. And I think that most logical people will come to, is we say, look, here's our measuring stick. If it fits in this box, we get to call it terrorism. And they throw January 6th. And basically people go, everyone? And some people say everyone. And then I go, you're not looking at what they were doing there. And then they go, some of them. And I go, okay, some of them, I can see how this fits the definition. Yes. And then I would say, okay, insurrections, Antifa, right? What about Chaz, right? They declared an independent nation within the United States, and they took over a courthouse, which, sounds familiar, right? They took over a government building, declared an independent nation, and then guarded it with arms for like a month. But that wasn't an insurrection or terrorism. And it just makes me really worried, because the key to stability in a democracy is an independent judiciary. And if we don't have an independent judiciary in the United States, effectively you have regulation and legislation by the executive, right? By enforcement. The law is what the person at the top says what the law is. And in the US, that person at the top can change every 4 years. That doesn't make for a stable society. It doesn't make for stable investments. Like, how can you plan a business if you don't know if your business will be legal in 4 years, right? And I think, the marijuana industry has seen this in particular, right? Those guys have struggled, not just socioculturally about acceptance or non-acceptance or the morality of using or not using marijuana, but just legally speaking, those guys don't know whether they're coming or going.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency also is the same way right now. Cryptocurrency, which is probably the largest opportunity, and it's probably the biggest wealth transfer to like the little guy that we've ever seen. When you look at how many guys got into cryptocurrency before banks, while banks were still saying that it's nonsense and it's a Ponzi scheme and all this other stuff, guys were buying Bitcoin. And a lot of these guys are just little guys who now can afford apartments that they never could have afforded because they invested in Bitcoin when Bitcoin was at like, 400 or 500, and maybe it was at 1,000 or 2,000. And now it's sitting at $40,000, and they've outperformed the best hedge funds on Wall Street. And now, of course, the SEC wants to come in and act like they have the authority to regulate. And it's not clear that they do.
No.
But they're going to regulate by enforcement. And they're going to say, well, we're going to take you to court. We're going to sue you and ruin your life and your company. And then we'll see whether or not you broke the law. And that's not rule of law. That's not healthy. That's what a dictatorship does.
At the same time, there are people who are running right now for Senate. Josh Mandel in Ohio and Blake Masters in Arizona. They already called for Fort Satoshi Nakamoto as a new Fort Knox for United States government to hold Bitcoin. And, this contrast, I think, exists exactly because there is a power struggle for a vacuum that has been created as a result of 4 years of maybe 5 years of Trump, who I consider to be a psychedelic. Trump was a psychedelic. It's like...
I like that.
Yeah, the entire world tripped on Trump really hard, and some people have been having very bad trips because their entire identity and worldview was shattered. That how is this even possible?
I like that. I've not thought of it that way before, but I really like that, actually. Trump was a trip. He really was like a psychedelic, because in a way you were like, is this real? There's aspects of reality to some of these things, and then some of these things I don't know. Some of his behavior I personally found kind of bizarre. And so I guess...
Yeah, but he also revealed that it doesn't really matter who's elected president. There is a class in DC, which I have a friend, he's a White House correspondent. He's saying DC is not even America. It's like an occupied zone, basically, by people whose interest is not shared with absolute majority of American people. And they've taken over this country. So absolutely, it has everything they're doing. It has political incentive and political implication. But I think they've overreached. And that's like a silver lining in all of this to me, that they just gone overboard. That's why they're becoming very overtly coercive and violent, and it's just not sustainable, because United States is not North Korea.
Exactly. And one of the things that a lot of the work that I've done in the AI space has allowed me to do is kind of investigate what causes things to go wrong. Right? What happens when you overly centralize an identity, when you overly centralize power? or what happens when you make it like super distributed. And one of the patterns that we've seen in this research is that when you overly centralize power, or you overly centralize the culture, the cultural permissibility, um, you end up breaking the system. And the fact of the matter is just that, humans are different. Like, we're all different. And that's the cool thing about us, actually. It's what I love the most is, when I talk to somebody, you don't know what's going to happen, right? They could end up being your best friend, or you could just be like, I didn't like that guy at all, right? And it's just that's our beauty, and that's our curse, right? Because sometimes we're too different to get along, and other times we're just different enough to cooperate, but we're not going to be friends, but we'll be colleagues, like, and everything in between. And when you overly centralize power to people of a specific kind of belief or a specific kind of background, you're always going to neglect the people that are towards the extremity of wherever you sit on that spectrum. And so that is never going to create stability, because eventually everyone else is going to start teaming up on you, and you're going to effectively be an imperialist within your own country.
Yeah.
And this happens whenever you see the centralization of power, right? Every single major historical example of a complex society that has collapsed effectively because it overly centralized economic decision making and overly pushed that to deal with problems that it itself was creating. So, like, for example, in this, you can actually read a guy with Cambridge University Press actually published a book called The Complex of Complexes, or The Collapse of Complex Societies. His name's Joseph Tainter. He's a professor at Utah. He surveyed over 20 different complex societies and basically found that what happens is when a society makes an investment into something, some problem that it has, there's an effect of declining marginal returns in the economic sense. And basically what that means is that when you put $1 in the first time, you get $1 out. But when you put $1 in the second time, you only get like 98 cents back out. And then when you put $1 in again, maybe you only get 90 cents out. And the more money you put into these problems, the less value you actually get out of it. And at a certain point, societies start putting money into problems that the problem solvers have created. And when you get to the point where you're putting resources, if it's wood in the Roman Empire, if it's olive trees in the Greek Empire, like the Greek Empire was built without wood. Like, a lot of people don't realize how much wood does not grow in Greece. And so because of that, like, they had to rely on trade. So when they were investing in social problems, there was a very clear declining marginal return, right? This works in barter systems. It works for gold. It happened to the Mayas and the Incas. And to an extent, I think we can look at this also happening in the United States today. And that's one of the biggest worries that I see. It happened in the Soviet Union, right? But at the point in which your government is saying, oh, this is a problem, I can fix it, I need some money, and we go, okay, here's some money, and they fix it. But then later, their fix created a problem that they then need more money to fix. We can start to see how our returns on our tax money investment are getting lower and lower and lower. And with a U.S. national debt that gets so high that its interest payments alone are no longer able to be paid, much less the principal, you start to see how we start to get into an unsustainable trajectory where our money is it's not solving our problems as a society. And there's becoming so much of it because of inflation that it's not even getting us that far anyways. So between inflation of a debased currency and over centralization of decision making in a society, that's what really leads to very serious and systemic issues in societies that otherwise, right, like, most major empires don't fall because of the military. They fall internally. And these are the mechanisms that, like, some of the AI systems that we've been studying are addressing aspects of this. Different economic models from archaeologists even are seeing this. And this is a recurrent pattern. And, they say history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And I worry that this is what we're looking at right now. And unless we really find a way to kind of get back to local communities and just address what the people of the United States are worried about, and not be worried about what the people in DC are worried about, or coastal elites in cities generally are worried about, and kind of get back to the ground, right? Get back to the earth. We're not going to be dealing with an ideological reality that can solve the very real problems that we're going to face over the next, let's say, 50 to 100 years.
The government justifies its existence as a problem solver. So solving problems is against the interest of government's existence. Because if you solve problem, there is no need for government.
Right? And I think this is one of the main reasons why the biggest structural change that Americans should mandate, right? Make it a non-negotiable, are term limits. Because, and this actually comes from something I remember reading from Thomas Jefferson, is that the politician should not be a job. Being a politician should not be a career. It should be something you don't even want to do, right? It should be something you're forced or obliged to do because you feel it is your duty as an American to be a government servant. But that through term limits, you're forced to deal with the reality that you create. So that if you're a farmer, when you go in, you got 4 years, maybe we'll get you 6 years in the Senate or something like that. And then after those 6 years, you're going to go back to farming. And if you screwed up the country, it's going to make your life harder. What the biggest risk, and one of the reasons why I think we see what we see in America today, is because, Nancy Pelosi can get in 1985 and she doesn't have to do anything except stand up and say a bunch of nonsense, ruin a bunch of people's lives, and then she comes out with a net worth of $120 million, yep. Which, given taxes, I saw a funny thing, a napkin calculation that I was doing, is that effectively, if we assume, right, her salary is $233,000 a year. So if we assume that she lived a very, very, let's say, a life within her means, which she didn't, and that she invested $100,000 a year on average since she basically got into politics in like 1987. Then her average returns must have been about 30 to 35% investing in the market, is how she could have had to have made that money. That makes her the greatest investor in the history of the country. Warren Buffett's average annual returns are about 20% on average a year. So we need to stop reading Warren Buffett, and we need to choose whatever strategy Nancy Pelosi has chosen in her investments. And that, I think, is an interesting question to ask, is, well, if she causes the problems and she solves the problems and she contracts the companies that are going to or are not going to solve these problems, is it possible that she was, doing something that she shouldn't have been? And obviously, it seems very clear that she's been insider trading for 35 years, because otherwise you can't save enough. It would take her like 1,000 years to save that much money.
Yeah, so the beauty of this era is that the jig is up. The curtain has fallen. So we'll see where it leads. I don't think Nancy Pelosi was an early investor in Bitcoin or anything like that. So it's
not according to her financial returns. She was, at least maybe she's not. I mean, is she lying? I would not be surprised.
Nancy Pelosi
I think the
lying.
funniest thing about this, right? Yeah. I think my favorite thing about the news that I heard about her recently is that she's moving to Florida.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like, she's from Maryland originally. So she's like from my neck of the woods. And then she moved out to California basically as, because her parents were well connected in politics. So she gets up to California, ruins California for 35 years, and then goes, oh, you know where I'm going to go? I'm going to go to Florida. Even though she was one of those people that was calling DeSantis basically a murderer because he wasn't going to do lockdowns.
AOC was here partying. She was calling DeSantis murderer.
I heard about this. Yeah, they were saying, oh, this is murder and all that. You're killing innocent lives. And it's like the first place you guys go when you get a chance to go somewhere is there. And then AOC got COVID for partying maskless in Florida. And she's been awfully silent about it. And I think that's funny.
But hey, I think AOC revealed something very fundamental very early on when she said that it's more important to be morally right than factually correct. And that's all we need to know about how they operate, how they see the world. And this is my concern, that the very same people are in charge of these AI systems that are being built that AI ethics and AI ethicists are, hell bent on monopolizing on them on Google, and there's been a civil war going on in the Google AI department for a while, and in many other places. So this localization that you're saying politically, which is absolutely the way, it seems to be the absolutely the way for AI as well, to decentralize this development of AI, that even if
Yeah.
it's going to lead to AGI, which, for example, Ben Goertzel believes that we're going to reach AGI in like 10
Yeah.
years, 15 years, and he's building his singularity net because of that. So AGI wouldn't be
Yeah. That
owned
is very
by,
much as well.
yeah, I'm all in favor of that kind of an approach, but it also begs the question that how are we going to be decentralized yet operating on the basis of some kind of a point of alignment, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation, that there are certain values that define the
Yes.
identity of the perspective.
Exactly. And I do think that that's one of the things that Ben's not taking into account. Um, it's kind of funny. He was at Oxford for a conference. He did like the AGI conference, global conference was at Oxford while I was there. And I got to go out and have a couple of beers with him and with Dave Hansen as well, who
his partner.
Hansen Robotics.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do a lot together. They're very they're friends. They're like honest friends too. They were very interesting guys. I had met Dave Hansen before actually at the Terracin Institute. He was doing some work on Bina 48, one of the first like robots that he worked with.
Martin Rothblatt.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so I was there. It's in Vermont, so it was actually not far from where I was living at the time, and got to meet them and talk to them, and they have a very utopian view, which in a way I like their positivity, but I do worry that sometimes positivity can lead to naivety, and I like the idea of if there is going to be an AGI, it needs to be decentralized, because any centralization, like I said before, right, is prone to issues. And just like AOC wouldn't want Trump in charge of the AGI, I wouldn't want AOC in charge of the AI, right? You don't have enough natural intelligence. I sure as hell don't want you to have the artificial one. And, and that's something I think that's interesting. And you mentioned Google, for example, and Google's big issue in AI ethics recently, right, hasn't even been, should we build this? They just kind of build it and then move on. There has been some issue with DeepMind. DeepMind doesn't want to be part of Google anymore, and I'm very interested to know more about why that is, but not much has come out about it except for the fact that they asked to basically be spun out. But the biggest AI issue in Google recently hasn't been mass surveillance, hasn't been data protection, hasn't been data ethics, the right to be forgotten, or any of these other things. It was Gaberu. It was, the fact that one of their AI researchers who has done actually really good work too, by the way. Like, I'm not trying to just throw her under the bus. I have a lot of respect for some of the work she's done, but she did not want to go through a peer-reviewed process, right? And she said, if I can't go around this peer review, then I'm resigning. And Google said, we accept.
Yep.
And she said she was fired. No, she was not fired. She resigned. She gave them the ultimatum, and they called her bluff, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that was, in a nutshell, right? It's better to be morally right than factually correct.
Exactly.
That's what that was. Exactly. Is I don't want to put myself up for critique to be shown factually correct, which is bizarre to me, right? Because one of the findings that like Gaberu and some of the colleagues that work on those problems have found, right, has to do with like things like gender and racial biases in AI. And they've mathematically proven without a shadow of a doubt that biases exist in the way that they've presented them. You can't deny, like it's mathematically provable. It's undeniable that those biases exist. And so for me, it's like, look, it aligns with her ideology. She does go more towards the woke side, and I think that's fine, right? If there's a systemic bias in our AI, we need to either address it or know that it exists and be comfortable with it. And if we're not comfortable with certain racial or gender biases, many of them there, personally, I'm not comfortable with them. I'd like to see us understand how we can address them rather than just going in and addressing them. I think we need to raise those questions, but saying, either you stop asking me these questions or I quit, that's not that's not something that I think is very helpful
It's
for the AI
criticizing the high
debate.
priest, like exactly what we're
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah, right. You can't, or excommunication befalls you,
Yeah.
right? And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that worries me about the fact that most AI developers and most people making big decisions in AI ethics come from. I'm not so much worried about left right, so much as I'm worried about woke, the woke ideology. You know, people will always be more left or more right, and that it's largely a meaningless designation anyways, right? Because for me, I know people who are really far left, but they're also anti-authoritarianists, and I actually get along really well with them because
Yeah.
fundamentally I kind of agree with them because they're anti-authoritarian.
Yeah.
So whatever nonsense they might believe that I disagree with, they're not going to force it on me.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, that's cool. You do you, I'll do me. And I the same with people who are on the far right that are further right than I am. So long as they're not authoritarian, I'm okay. It's just a disagreement. But the moment they go, oh, and I think you should do this too, I get worried. And a lot of the people who are on the AI side are also saying, and here's what I believe. I've designed AI to try and mimic what I believe. And I'm going to force this AI to force you to conform to my beliefs. And the biggest way that's instantiated today, I think, is in censorship on social media. For example, I mean, and some of these are horrendous, right? So, for example, not being able to even discuss the laptop, Hunter Biden's laptop, right before the election. And, oh, it was a bombshell to manipulate the election. It was like, yeah, and the entirety of the media before then was, no blood on anyone's hands on trying to support a candidate before then. That's when it started, right? It's nonsense.
Now, all the
But
people who came out, retired people from intelligence communities, who signed that letter that this is Russia propaganda.
right?
So what's going to happen to those people? This is a
Yeah, right.
problem.
Is there going to be any recourse to that? I mean, but when you look at what happened with the original Russiagate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so much of that was shown to basically in the end, when they investigated it, the Democrats, the opposition looked just as bad or worse than Trump and his crowd. If anything, I think it made Trump look rather inept.
Yep.
Not this grand conspirator. He was not the Wizard of Oz here. He was not the man behind the green curtain. If anything, he was kind of, the Tin Man sitting around waiting for everybody else. Meanwhile, you see people like, Hillary Clinton in the background in her campaign trying to pull all of these little levers. And the further we dug into it, the further it looked like this was just a lot of nonsense on all sides. But this media narrative became unbreakable, right? It became like Russiagate became like Blue Anon. It was just like the Democrats' version of the conspiracy that the further left you go, the more you find it to be an unassailable truth. And it was really worrying, I think, to see that. I think, there's a case for moderation to be made when we look and I mean moderation, like moderating our own behaviors and supports towards social media. When you look at the fact that they don't allow us to speak about certain things because of a political agenda, and then they tell us they're apolitical, it's like, don't tell me that. Like, it's obviously not true. Just be on, if you're going to be away, just be honest about it so that I know not to use your social media platform if you're not going to allow me to participate in a conversation. And I think, you mentioned earlier, right, that having the conversation is critical to democracy, and people just don't even know about the AI that exists and the problems with social media. One of the reasons for this is a very suspicious event that happened, right? When Frances Haugen, who previously worked for Facebook, released all of these documents as a whistleblower. She releases all of these documents. It goes onto the Wall Street Journal. She ends up appearing before the Senate and all of this stuff. When those documents were released, they were going viral across several social media channels, but they weren't going viral on the largest social media channels basically in the world, right? Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, because all three of those companies are all owned by Facebook. Now, since the revelation, right, now they changed their name to Meta and not Facebook anymore. So they're all three being accused, or it's being demonstrated that they knew that they were bad for society. They knew that they were being politically manipulative and politically manipulated by external forces. And instead of going viral on Facebook, all of the Facebook servers just shut down in, what was it, 8 to 12 hours.
Yep.
Now, any social media researcher will tell you that when hot news breaks, the first 6 to 12 hours after it's posted is critical to determining the amplitude, right? How high it will go. It'll go a little viral, but is it going to go 3 million viral, or is it going to go 3 billion viral? And that Frances Haugen news had the possibility to go 3 billion accounts viral across all of the different social media channels. But it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because somebody made a coding error at Facebook at exactly the right time, and all of those servers mysteriously went down for an unrelated reason. And it's like, come on. And you see that they'll give you a slap on the wrist for questioning about Hunter Biden, but they will shut the whole farm down if it makes them look bad and it exposes what they've knowingly been doing for years.
Yeah, so more liberty, less secrecy, more transparency, less secrecy, more decentralization, less centralization.
100%, man.
Yeah.
The world's weird and chaotic. Let's love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, ride with it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're reaching the end because your time is limited, and I really appreciate this conversation. It was awesome. Let me ask you the last question I ask all my guests. That if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done, and what would you say is our greatest achievement?
What is the worst thing, like single event that humanity's done? Or
something we built, worst and best in humanity?
The worst and best in humanity. Okay, that's a hard one to answer. That's a good question. So for me, I think that the worst of humanity has been embodied historically, and the biggest threat to humanity is also the biggest threat to humanity in the future. And that is Marxism. That as a ideology, what it's done, right? Just it saddens me. And then I live in a post-communist country now, right? So the Iron Curtain is like 20 minutes from here. I can walk along the Iron Curtain, and they have like names of people who were literally eaten alive by dogs for trying to cross the Iron Curtain and just get to Austria to get to their freedom. And I've lost track of the number of people that I've spoken to here that were smuggled out as children to freedom in the West. And so, having learned about it is one thing, but then having heard the stories of people who have lived through it here in Slovakia, and as I learned the Slovak language, I can talk to the older generation, right, who couldn't learn English, right? And I get to hear their stories and stuff. And I think that's our darkest moment, I think, is Marxism and communism. And it's still today. Our greatest achievement. Our greatest achievement, man. In a way, I would say that our greatest achievement as a species was probably the internet. I would say our greatest achievement is the internet. Our finest hour is this massive technological ridiculousness that is both beautiful, and its energy and its communication. And my hope is that we realize that no matter what it is we create as people, and no matter how beautiful something like our greatest technologies are, nothing is ever going to be better or more beautiful than just walking out in the woods with your friends and loved ones and actually turning the phones off and sitting around a bonfire. That would be it. So maybe my other answer, if I can have two, is the greatest achievement humans ever had was figuring out how to light a fire. I'll keep it with that.
Beautiful. Awesome.